The village was silent, too silent. Smoke curled above broken roofs, twisting into a gray sky. Ash fell like snow over what remained. Powell stepped through the rubble, his boots crunching on shattered timbers. Every step brought a new horror. A chair overturned, a child's toy scorched. He did not hear laughter, not a single voice. Only the wind whispered secrets of fire and destruction. The smell of charred wood filled his nostrils. And then a sound, soft, fragile. A groan came from beneath a collapsed wall. Pavel froze, heart hammering. Through the smoke he saw movement, one small shape, shivering, barely alive. A German soldier, young, face streaked with blood and soot. Their eyes met, fear mirrored in both of them. Pavel's village had been burned, his family was gone. And yet, here was a man, trembling and bleeding, begging for mercy. The wind carried a bitter question. Should he save him? Pavel bent down. His hands shook. Somewhere inside, a voice whispered, even in war, humanity remains. But what he saw next didn't belong in a war. The morning was gray and cold. Powell moved through the village streets, each step echoing on cobblestones. Smoke lingered in the air like a living thing. He smelled fire, soot, and something worse, fear. Houses stood as hollow shells, windows shattered, doors torn from hinges. Every corner held shadows of what had been. A burned cradle, a scorched kettle, a child's shoes half buried in ash. He kept his hands tight to his sides, trembling. His stomach growled. Hunger gnawed at him. He thought of his mother, of his little sister. Where had they gone? He shook the question away. There were no answers, only survival, only movement, only the soft groan from the wall. The German soldier lay there, hidden beneath timbers and rubble. His uniform was torn, mud-caked, burned in places. Blood trickled from a wound on his side. He coughed, small and wet, eyes wide with fear. Powell swallowed hard. He had every reason to leave him, to let him die. But something in the soldier's gaze arrested him. A mixture of terror and pleading that mirrored Powell's own. The wind cut across the village square, sharp and bitter. Powell lifted the timbers carefully, careful not to crush the soldier. Each piece of wood was a threat, each splinter a reminder of death. Finally, he cleared enough space to drag the man out. The soldier coughed violently. Blood speckled his lips. Danke, bitte, he muttered. Powell did not answer. Words felt useless. He only nodded, gestured toward a ruined barn. It was not safe. It was barely standing, but it was all they had. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and dust. Powell laid the soldier on a heap of tattered straw. He ripped a strip from his own shirt and pressed it to the wound. The soldier flinched, then closed his eyes. Powell could hear the heartbeat in his own chest. It was too loud, too frantic. Outside, distant explosions echoed like thunder, a reminder that the war had not stopped, that the village had not stopped burning, that death was patient, waiting in every corner. Pavel looked at the man he was saving, a German, the enemy, the reason his village had fallen, and yet he could not turn away. He wanted to scream, wanted to rage against the sky, against the soldiers who had come here. But the soldiers' shallow breaths demanded attention, and for a moment, rage was irrelevant. Only life mattered. Night fell like a heavy curtain. Shadows crept across the walls of the barn. The cold pierced through Pavel's thin coat. He shivered, wrapping himself around the soldier like a shield. Each crackle of fire outside made him flinch. Each distant shout made him freeze. The wind carried voices, German commands, cries of men, laughter that did not belong. ... Powell's hands ached from holding the rag tight against the wound. He felt the warmth of blood seep through his fingers. His stomach knotted. The soldier stirred, eyes fluttering open. He whispered something Powell could not understand. A plea, a curse, a confession. Powell only nodded, unsure what mercy meant in a world that had burned everything he loved. Sleep was impossible. He stared at the shattered rafters. The moon cast silver lines across the straw. He counted the lines, tried to make sense of the destruction. A broken bell tower, a collapsed roof, a familiar tree split in half. His heart ached for what was gone. And yet, in the darkness, he realized something strange. Even amidst ruin, the soldier's breathing was steadying. Even amidst death, he was performing an act of life. But that night, something changed. A shadow passed across the barn. Powell's hand went to the small knife at his belt. The soldier flinched, whispering, "Nicht schießen." Powell swallowed. The first light of dawn crept over the ruins. Powell's eyes ached from lack of sleep. The soldier stirred, groaning softly, hand clutching his side. "Du bist verletzt," Powell muttered, unsure why he spoke. The soldier's lips quivered. He did not answer. Powell tore strips from an old blanket. He wrapped the man as gently as he could. The barn smelled of smoke, blood, and straw. It was a smell that would haunt him forever. Powell could not stop staring at the soldier. A boy, barely older than his own brother. And yet, he had helped destroy Powell's home. The contradiction twisted in his chest. Sheer survival was simple. Forgiveness was not. The soldier coughed violently. Powell pressed the cloth tighter. "Warum tust du das?" the soldier whispered. Powell shook his head. He had no answer. He wanted to hate him. He wanted to leave him to the wolves outside, but something in the way the soldier's hands trembled, something human, fragile and helpless, it made that impossible. Hours passed like days. Outside, smoke still clawed at the sky. Footsteps echoed from the distant forest. Powell stiffened. He pressed a finger to his lips, motioning silence. The soldier's eyes widened. Fear mirrored his own. Powell wondered if the men approaching were friend or foe. The shadow passed. A German patrol. They did not notice the barn. Powell exhaled. Relief was short, sharp, and bitter. He watched the soldier carefully. A small movement, a cough, a whisper of pain. And yet a fragile spark of life remained. Powell spoke softly, words broken by fear. "Stay alive, please." The soldier flinched. A faint smile touched his lips. It was weak, fragile, but it existed. And for a moment, Powell felt connection. Connection was dangerous. Connection was forbidden. Connection was human. He thought of his family, gone, burned, killed. And yet, here he was, preserving life, enemy life, the contradiction a heavy stone in his chest. If this was mercy, why did it hurt so much? Days passed. Powell scavenged for food, hiding the soldier under debris. Bread, roots, anything to keep him alive. Each act of care was a rebellion against the world outside. Each glance was a quiet confession. "We are more than enemies." The soldier spoke rarely, only muttered words in German. Powell understood little, but sometimes their eyes said everything. One morning, the soldier tried to sit. Pain flashed across his face. Powell placed a hand on his shoulder. "Nicht springen," he warned gently. The soldier nodded, fear and trust tangled in his gaze. At night, Powell stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind. He imagined his family's faces. And he imagined what this soldier had seen. He wondered if he too had lost everything. Perhaps that explained the fear. Perhaps that explained the trembling hands and haunted eyes. A subtle bond began to form. Not friendship, not trust, not yet, but understanding, recognition of human fragility. The barn became a fragile sanctuary. Outside, the war raged. Inside, humanity clung to life. Powell found himself speaking aloud to the soldier. Stories of the village, memories of laughter, of warmth. The soldier listened, eyes wide, nodding faintly. No words were needed. The unspoken understanding filled the silence. Sometimes the soldier whispered in German, Danke. Powell shook his head. He wanted to refuse gratitude, but he did not. He only nodded. The days blended into nights. Each sunrise brought fear. Each sunset brought exhaustion. And yet, in those moments, they discovered something fragile, compassion, even in war, even between enemies, a microvuk. But she didn't know yet. Pavel found a letter tucked in his coat pocket, his father's handwriting charred at the edges. He read the words again and again, trying to draw strength. Protect life, even if it belongs to an enemy. The soldier coughed, clutching his side. Pavel offered water. The soldier took it, shaking. Eyes met. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. They were trapped in war, trapped by circumstances, trapped by morality, and yet they were alive. That was enough. The barn walls groaned under the weight of snow. Outside, men shouted. Guns cracked. Dogs barked. Inside, life persisted. Connection, however fragile, was a rebellion against the chaos, and for Pavel, it was the first warmth he had felt since the fire. Snow drifted through the gaps in the barn's walls. Powell stared at the soldier, wondering how a man could survive so much. He did not ask. Words felt dangerous. Instead, he watched, observed the shallow rise of the soldier's chest, and listened. A cough, a whisper, a faint moan, life itself. That evening, Powell found a small notebook tucked beneath the soldier's coat. The leather was cracked. The pages smelled faintly of smoke and earth. Curiosity overcame fear. He opened it. Inside, the handwriting was careful, precise. Notes about family, about home, about dreams. Dreams that did not match the uniform he wore. Powell felt a strange pang. The soldier was not a monster. He was a boy, a son, a brother. He had names, memories, regrets, and perhaps fears just like Powell's. A flashback crept into Powell's mind. The day the village burned, flames licking the sky, screams cutting through the morning. He had tried to save his sister. She had fallen. He had tried to stop the fire. The flames had eaten everything, and now here was the enemy, bleeding, vulnerable, human. The contradiction twisted in his chest. The soldier stirred, muttering in German, I, lost, alles. Powell did not understand every word, but the meaning was clear. He had lost everything too. Night after night, Powell read the notebook aloud. The soldier listened, sometimes nodded, sometimes whispered responses Powell did not understand, but the connection deepened. They were no longer just survivor and enemy. They were two men bound by shared loss. One evening, Powell found a photograph tucked in the notebook. A young woman, smiling, holding a child. The soldier traced her face with a trembling finger. His lips quivered. He did not speak, but Powell understood. Loss was universal. War took without reason, and yet memory persisted. Powell shared his own memories. The family he had lost, the fields he had tended, the church bell that no longer rang. The soldier listened, eyes wide, haunted, and for the first time Powell heard a faint laugh, soft, fragile, like ice cracking in spring. They shared food in silence, each bite a quiet affirmation. We are alive. We endure. But the war shadow lingered. Every creak of the barn, every distant gunshot, every howl of wind over the frozen fields reminded them of danger. Powell noticed something odd in the notebook. Maps, sketches of villages, names crossed out. He frowned. The soldier noticed the scrutiny and tensed. He was hiding something, Powell realized. Something that could change everything. He wanted to ask, to demand, but the bond they had built complicated courage. He could not act without knowing. And yet, he felt unease curling like smoke in his chest. One night, the soldier slept fitfully. Powell watched him, noticing scars beneath the uniform, stories etched into skin. Pain that words could not capture. A sudden movement. Powell's hand went to the knife at his belt. But the soldier only stirred, mumbling a single word. Verzeih, forgive. Powell exhaled, trembling. Forgiveness was impossible, and yet necessary. He remembered a letter from his father, charred, half-burned. Protect life, even if it belongs to the enemy. The words resonated now, echoing in the frozen barn. Outside, the village remained a graveyard of snow and ash. Inside, two men clung to fragile life, fragile trust. The soldier began speaking more. Small phrases, broken words. Powell learned some. I wanted home. I did not want this war. I am sorry. And Powell began to understand. War had made enemies out of boys, but it had not erased humanity. A microhook, but she didn't know the truth yet. One evening, Powell found a burned letter in the rubble. The edges crumbled in his hands. It was a plea. From a family. From someone long gone. It spoke of fear, survival, hope. He read it aloud to the soldier. The soldier's eyes glistened. Powell felt a connection not just to this man, but to all those torn apart by war. The soldier revealed a secret, a planned patrol nearby. Men who would sweep through the village. Kill, loot, destroy. Powell's stomach turned. He realized the danger had not passed. This man he was saving might bring death with him, and yet he could not abandon him. Compassion was a risk. Mercy was perilous, but they had crossed the point of return. Powell's hand lingered on the soldier's shoulder. Silent acknowledgement passed between them. The barn, though small and fragile, had become a world of its own. A world where connection defied logic, defied war, defied fear. Memory, loss, trust, and danger intertwined like roots under frozen soil. Powell whispered softly, Wir überleben zusammen. We survive, together. And for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. But shadow. The wind turned sharp and cruel, biting through Powell's coat. Snow lay thick across the village ruins. The barn no longer felt safe. Each groan of timber echoed like a death knell. Outside, distant gunfire cracked through the morning. It was closer than before. Powell tightened the blanket around the soldier. He shivered, not from cold, but from fear. The soldier's eyes darted to every shadow. Every sound was a threat. The world outside had become a hunter. One morning, the door of the barn burst open. A group of men, strangers with rifles, stormed inside. Powell froze. His heart pounded. The soldier flinched. Step back, one of them barked. Words harsh, cold. Powell's stomach twisted. He knew they would see the soldier. And then, chaos. The men shouted, accusations, confusion. The soldier attempted to rise, weak and trembling. One man raised the rifle. Time slowed. Powell lunged forward, pushing the soldier down. A shot rang out. Splinters of wood flew. Powell felt pain in his shoulder. The soldier whimpered. Outside, the world erupted in smoke and fire. The village, already a graveyard, became a battlefield. Powell dragged the soldier to the corner. He pressed a hand to the wound, whispering prayers he barely knew. "Versailles," the soldier murmured. Powell shook his head. Forgiveness was impossible. Survival was fragile. Days blurred together. Food ran low. Water was ice-cold and scarce. Each day was a test of endurance. The soldier grew weaker. Powell feared the moment his strength would fail. He scavenged what he could from the ruins. Bread, frozen potatoes, a few scraps of meat. He gave everything to the soldier. And yet, he felt hollow. Loss weighed heavier than hunger. The barn, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. Outside, distant artillery hammered the earth. The sky was gray, angry, unrelenting. One night, Powell dreamed of fire. He saw his family, the village, the fields, all consumed. He woke screaming. The soldier reached for his hand. Their fingers touched. Fragile contact in a shattered world. Powell could feel the life in the soldier's pulse. It was faint, but it was there. He whispered, "Wir überleben, together." Outside, the ground trembled. Explosions tore through the earth. Debris rained down, smashing the barn walls. The roof sagged dangerously. Powell pressed the soldier against the floor. Each second was eternity. They survived. Barely. But survival brought no relief. It brought reflection, pain, memory. Powell remembered the faces of the men who had burned the village, the screams he could never forget, the smell of fire and death lingering on every stone. And yet, here he was, saving one of them. The contradiction burned in his mind. If this was survival, why did it feel like dying? The soldier whispered something in German. Powell did not understand every word, but the tone was human, fragile, apologetic. Powell closed his eyes, trying to reconcile mercy and hatred. Days turned into nights. The war pressed closer, unstoppable. The barn groaned under weight of snow and ruin. Powell scavenged once more, finding a hidden stash of potatoes. It was enough for days. But the soldier's wound festered. Each movement brought pain. Each cough stole breath. And still they endured. One evening, Powell found a torn piece of cloth from a neighbor's coat. He fashioned a sling for the soldier's arm, small gestures against the chaos of war. The soldier tried to smile. It was weak, trembling, fading. Powell felt despair creep into his chest. The collapse was not just outside, it was inside. Every memory of fire, blood, and loss clawed at him. He could not sleep, could not eat, could not think. Only survive, only protect. Outside, a patrol moved near the edge of the forest. Powell pressed the soldier down. Silent prayers passed through his lips. The soldiers did not enter. The danger had passed, for now. But fear had nested deep within them. It would not leave. They were alive, but the world they knew was gone. And Powell understood something essential. Survival was not triumph. It was endurance, and endurance carried the weight of everything lost. A micro-hook. But she didn't know yet. The soldier coughed violently that night. Powell held him, rocking gently, whispering what little comfort he could offer. Outside, the wind moaned through the shattered windows. Inside, humanity clung desperately to life. Powell realized that collapse was not always external. Sometimes it was internal. A quiet, grinding erosion of hope. He pressed his hand to the soldier. The first thaw came quietly, almost unnoticed. Snow melted into slush, seeping through cracks in the barn floor. Powell noticed a small green shoot through the rubble. Life. Fragile, stubborn, defiant. He knelt, brushing the mud from it with careful fingers. The soldier watched him, eyes tired but alive. Powell smiled faintly. It was a small victory, a whisper of hope. Days passed. The sun began to linger longer in the sky. Shadows softened. Colors returned, muted but present. Powell and the soldier ventured outside cautiously. The village was still ruins, blackened timbers, broken stone. But birds sang among the wreckage. The wind carried faint scents of pine and earth, a reminder that the world could continue. The soldier helped Powell clear debris. Slow, careful movements. A partnership formed, silent but profound. They worked in unison, side by side. No words were needed. The village had taken everything, but it had left the two of them alive, and perhaps something more. Powell noticed the soldier's eyes linger on small details. A carved chair, half buried, a fragment of a window, a memory of home. He understood. Loss was universal. They discovered a small cellar beneath the barn. It had stored potatoes, flour, and preserves before the fire. It was a gift from the past, a chance to rebuild. They worked together, lifting debris and stacking supplies. A rhythm developed. Simple, human, alive. The soldier began speaking more. Words in German, sometimes halting, sometimes strong. Powell understood more than before. They shared stories of family, of dreams, of moments before the war. Laughter came slowly, fragile as ice on a thawing river, and yet it came. One morning, Powell climbed to the roof of the barn. He watched the sun rise over blackened fields. Smoke lingered on the horizon, but it no longer suffocated him. The soldier joined him. Side by side, they looked at what remained. Powell whispered, "Wir leben, wir können wieder." We live, we can rebuild. The soldier nodded, a small smile touching his lips. Outside the village, other survivors began to appear, broken, weary, cautious. Powell and the soldier helped them. Shared food, shared warmth, shared strength. The barn became a small center of hope. A fragile community, bound by survival and compassion. Powell realized that mercy had transformed them both. The soldier, once a symbol of destruction, was now a partner in rebuilding. And Powell, once consumed by fear and loss, had found purpose again. They planted a small garden. Carrots, potatoes, onions. Symbols of life, insistence, and resistance to the darkness. The war was still outside, still raging, but within these walls, something new existed. Forgiveness, humanity, connection, a microhook. But she didn't know yet. The days grew longer. Snow melted fully. Streams flowed freely. Powell and the soldier cleared paths through the village. Rebuilt walls, reinforced roofs, mended fences. It was not complete. It would never be complete. But it was progress, and each act of rebuilding carried the weight of memory. The two men sat by a small fire one evening. The soldier handed Powell a tattered photograph. A smiling woman, a child in her arms. He whispered softly, "For dich, for Leben, for life, for you." Powell understood. War had taken much, but it had not erased compassion. Not here, not between them. The village remained a scar on the land. But inside, hearts began to heal. Sunlight glinted off the melting snow. Powell watched it reflect in the soldier's eyes. A quiet acknowledgement passed between them. The rebirth was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was real. Humanity had returned, fragile, stubborn, enduring. Powell whispered into the wind, into the ruins, into memory. Maybe the war never ended. It just moved inside them. And for the first time in months, he believed it. Years passed, and the village slowly changed. The charred timbers were replaced, roofs lifted to the sky. Grass grew through cracks in the cobblestones. Powell walked among the ruins that were no longer ruins. He carried memories heavier than any stone. The soldier remained by his side, older, quieter, but alive. They rebuilt together, not as enemies, but as men bound by survival. Each brick laid was a testament to endurance. Each window fixed was a refusal to forget. Neighbors returned, cautious at first, then with hope. Children laughed again among the streets Powell had once feared to cross. The war outside had moved on, but inside the scars lingered. They remembered the nights of fire, the screams, the cold, the hunger. They remembered what it meant to survive, to forgive, to care for someone who had been an enemy. Powell and the soldier planted trees along the village path, a line of green against the blackened earth. Every leaf a symbol of persistence, every branch a memory held gently, carefully. They never spoke of all that had been lost. Words could not capture it, only actions could. And so they acted, building, planting, protecting, sharing warmth, sharing bread, sharing life. Sometimes Powell would glance at the soldier. A faint smile, a quiet nod. It was enough. The village never forgot the war. It never forgot the fire, the destruction, the loss. But it remembered courage too. It remembered mercy. It remembered that life could endure, even when everything else was taken. Powell sometimes walked alone through the fields he had once tended. He remembered the laughter of his family. He remembered the cries of the village. And he remembered the man he had saved, the soldier who had once been enemy, now companion. The war had taken everything, but it had not taken their humanity. It had not taken their hearts. Even decades later, the snow returned each winter. The village remembered, and so did they. War left scars, invisible and lasting. But amid the ruins, something survived. Fragile, stubborn, enduring. A shared heartbeat between two men who had known loss, who had chosen mercy, who had chosen life. And as the sun rose over the rebuilt rooftops, Powell whispered softly, "War took everything, but it could not take the human heart."